There isn't enough science in this book, or aliens for that matter. Hi folks, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kat, and today I would like to talk about From the Grave of the Gods by Alan K. Dell, the first book in the Augment Saga. The book starts off with James, an astronaut, being held captive in a lab where some aliens are trying to get a certain memory out of him. He goes through a couple of flashes of memories until they land on the one that I assume they want, because this is what makes up the majority of the book. In this memory, a group of astronauts arrive on Mars, where they are supposed to investigate the crash site of a comet. 2 comets went past Mars and one of them crashed on the planet, so now astronauts from Earth are there to check it out, only to find that it's a spaceship. Their first encounter with some of the aliens that are still alive on the ship doesn't go so well, and after coming into contact with an alien substance, James blacks out and wakes up back on Earth months later. He soon notices that things are not quite as they seem with himself anymore, that some things have changed quite significantly, and he spends the rest of the book trying to find out exactly what is going on. Since I have quite a few things to say about this book, there will be moderate to heavy spoilers, I would say, so if you want to read this for yourself, then maybe this review is for after. Unless you don't care about spoilers. I like reading about alien species and what people imagine they might be like. Unfortunately, you don't get to see an awful lot of that in this, apart from the first hostile encounter, and then it cuts back to James waking up on Earth, and as such they also don't spend a lot of time in space. There's quite a bit of clunky telling going on in this book, so James will walk up to somebody, talk to them, and you get a whole paragraph about how this person was top of her class back in China or something. Or how James and Yuda became best friends during their trip to Mars, but you don't get to see any of it, it just gets told to the reader. Quite often you get somewhat lengthy descriptions of places James goes to or events that happen around him that have little to no significance for the story. So for instance, at one point he goes to the doctor's office in the hospital and you get the whole, oh, I traveled by bus, I went through the waiting room, blah blah blah, and it has no impact on the story whatsoever. You could have just cut straight to the doctor's office and the conversation they're having. When the astronauts get to Mars, they are just about ready to leave their landing capsule with only one of them back on the actual spaceship. And instead of just going out, because you would assume that they are on the clock to build their base and whatnot, but instead of just going out, they sit in this capsule for a little while to discuss what the first words should be, that the first human to set foot on Mars should be. And in the end, they don't really come to an agreement, and James just hops out and recites a full poem that's like a page long in total. It's supposed to make him look profound and deep, and it just made me think he's a dingus. Plus, later on you learn that this poem is from a book of his girlfriend that she had on the nightstand or whatever. And when she tells him as much, he's like, oh yeah, I knew I read it somewhere. Also, you just recited like a full page of a poem, and you only have a very vague memory that you ever read it somewhere. It's like, yeah, very likely, sure. A lot of characters in the book seem to be very invested in James and Yuda's relationship, and they are just friends. Like, from the conversations you get between them, it's pretty obvious that there's nothing more going on. They're just getting along just fine. But because so many people point it out, James constantly thinks about it as well. It's like, oh no, there's nothing going on. Why is this fellow astronaut so jealous? I know he has a thing for her, but there's nothing happening here. And because other people keep mentioning it too, you also get to read about James's girlfriend back on Earth being jealous about this, and I can hardly tell you how little I care for that. The relationship between James and Angela, his girlfriend back on Earth, is supposed to be a great motivation for James, as she is the love of his life. But it just feels lifeless on the page. When he gets back to Earth, they barely talk about his experience, and it's just back to normal life of going to the doctors and doing laundry or whatever, and it just felt odd. And it slowed the book down quite a bit as well. When it becomes clear that there's something going on with James, The first thought Angela has is like, oh my god, there's another woman. And really, like, shit is happening with your partner and this is the only thing you can think about. I guess that's the only part a woman can care about. And when it becomes clear what is actually happening to James, Angela's first thought is for herself. So, charmingly selfish, yes. Thanks for that. And more on the pacing, for some reason in a later chapter, you get a really long and really detailed sex scene between those two. Whereas before I actually wondered whether there was anything happening between them at all, or maybe they were ace, I don't know. But no, they are actually into it, but it takes ages for it to happen. And then it's a super long and detailed scene that totally doesn't fit with the vibe of the rest of the book and really threw me off. Now, by far the worst part, the characters are just too dumb to live. Because something is going on with James, he undergoes experiments with the doctor to test his DNA and his reactions and his recovery rate and whatnot. So he goes to this doctor repeatedly, they run all sorts of tests, and then the doctor decides, yeah, I want to give you a lethal dose of radiation, strap in, and he's like, no, I don't want that, screw you. And then orderlies just tie James down and he gets this dose anyway. He passes out, he comes to, he drags himself home, he passes out and is in a coma for a week or something. And his girlfriend just calls the doctor that did those experiments, not an ambulance, doesn't take him to a hospital or anything, no, she just calls this doctor who just tells her to keep James hydrated, it's gonna be fine. First off, your partner is comatose in your house, you know, maybe it's ambulance time, just maybe. But say she wants to take care of him herself. As far as I know, she works as a secretary, so she's not like a certified nurse or anybody who actually has the skills to take care of a patient like that, nor does she have any of the equipment you would possibly need for this at home. So how the hell did James not die in this week, just lying in his bed without any care whatsoever? Who knows? But when he comes to, they talk about this and they decide that he needs to stop going to this doctor because those experiments are clearly whack. And he does so by actually going to this doctor's office, like far out, because this is a lab that is not in a hospital or anything. It's like secluded on some business estate or industrial estate. So he goes there unarmed to tell this doctor that he's done with those experiments, and oh, shocking, he gets captured by security and they will run further tests on him. Because sure, the guy who has clearly shown you that he has no ethics whatsoever with strapping you down and radiating you and possibly killing you, sure, you can just go back to this guy and tell him that you don't want to take part anymore. Couldn't have done that over the phone or, you know, not done it at all. The idiocy here just hurt my brain. Another example, Austin, the leader of the astronauts team, works in the US on some of the alien stuff as well when they get back. And James needs his help or needs some documents at some point. So Austin sends him very confidential material over some barely secured line, and then has a blackout in his flat. And then the doc that runs those experiments on James pops up on screen to gloat and tell him like, haha, thank you for sending me this stuff, you idiot. First off, why would you even give your game away like that? Why gloat like that? But, you know, it's an ego thing, I guess, so clearly that needed to happen. But then, instead of contacting James by any other means than the video call software they just used, Austin just goes back to work for several days until more shit goes down with James. You couldn't have like contacted him through the agencies, found other phone numbers, contacted his next of kin, Angela, the people he worked with before, like literally nothing. Austin just goes back to work and sees what happens. And the population of London in general doesn't seem to be much better either. James checks into a hotel with a shot up leg that is bleeding all over the place, but clearly the hotel staff doesn't care at all. Yeah, that's perfectly normal. Then a couple of mercenaries with machine guns enter this hotel lobby, and nobody reacts to them in any way until they start shooting at something. And that's not normal for London either. Like a machine gun would stick out far enough or enough for people to be instantly cautious when it appears on the scene. And I'm including cops in this. Like, you see a cop with a machine gun, you get cautious as well, because they're not usually armed over here. What characters are capable of doesn't make an awful lot of sense sometimes. For instance, James' leg injury bothers him enough so that he mentions it a couple of times, but then it's apparently not bad enough to keep him from doing certain things, so he can stand on it just fine to stomp somebody who's on the ground. Okay then. And even worse, on Angela, they get into a situation at some point, there's some fighting going on, and then Angela just sits on top of a guy and chokes him with her bare hands. She's never described as a martial artist or exceptionally buff or anything, and this dude is a mercenary and she just chokes him with her bare hands. I was like, yes, sure. Why not? More on the writing, apart from those descriptions that don't really go anywhere, and the telling rather than showing, the author goes a little overboard with dialogue tags, or like action tags to attach to dialogue. So for example, in little more than a page, one character spits out a sentence, screeches, says, so speaks normally, scoffs, scowls, and there's just too much going on. You don't need 20 different dialogue tags for one chapter. Sometimes it's literally better to just stick with said. At least it's invisible to the reader. I didn't bother counting it, but there were entirely too many instances of cried to tag shouting for my liking. So unfortunately, this is overall not a great book for me, and it gets this cat, and I don't think I will be picking up the next one. But don't let me complaining about it keep you from reading it and making up your own mind. If you do, please come back and let me know what you make of the book. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book about First Contact is. Like and subscribe if you want to help this channel out, and I'll be back next week with another video. Bye folks!